And we're on air. Good afternoon, literally. Good morning to some and good evening to some others. We're about to kick off our virtual event hosted by New York City Large Scale Scrum Community. Today, I'm honored to present a webinar podcast with Evan Cambell, who's an org design consultant and coach, who has lots of experience with management consulting, lean startups, agile software development, and DevOps, as well as other dimensions. Contextually, not too long ago, Evan wrote a very interesting article on Solutions IQ website about not copying and pasting Spotify model, where he brought up to light some very interesting unspoken details about challenges that many companies are facing today when they try to scale agility. My own LinkedIn post about this article generated soon to be 24,000 views. And this is just without counting reposts by others. So that's a pretty interesting topic for many. So before we get started, I would like to say a few words about logistics. The duration and pace will be set by Evan. Whenever you would like to stop talking and take questions, up to you, Evan. Questions will be ideally taken live in the chat room, and I will be restating them to Evan so we can minimize the background noise. Plus, we have top 5 collected ad hoc from people that reached out to me directly, interested in some of the questions to be answered. And last but not least, the usual question we get, will the slides be available? Well, there are no slides. So, but there will be a video available, and it will be available hopefully very soon. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass the baton over to Evan. The podium is yours. I'm going to go on mute, and everyone, please, pretty please, keep yourself on mute unless you are very eager to ask a question. Back to you, Evan.
Thanks, Gene. Great to virtually meet all of you. I'm excited to be here to talk with you about the Spotify model and or any other scaling or organizational design questions, comments, really anything at all that that you guys want to explore. As Gene alluded, this dialogue got started when I posted an article about how dangerous it is, how ill-advised it is to just implement the Spotify model as it was originally published. Honestly, you know, the original Spotify model as it was published wasn't even exactly what Spotify implemented. It was a simplification of, to some degree, a future state that they were experimenting towards. And it's also really important to recognize that they evolved beyond that. Spotify is a relatively small software product development organization that is highly adaptable, is always running experiments to improve their performance and reconsider optimization patterns for continuous improvement. And the heart of agile mindset really is about embracing this continuous adaptation, continuous improvement, experimentation, and evolution for greater fitness, greater performance. And so to ever think that an organization can take a design or a set of design patterns from another, especially one as dissimilar as Spotify, and that will produce the optimal outcome just by copying and pasting it is a terrible fallacy. And I have passion about this, and I got motivated to write this article because we at Solutions IQ are involved in so many agile transformations and digital transformations where large corporate IT organizations who couldn't be more dissimilar from a small Swedish music player app dev shop are implementing this same design simply because some consultancy that really isn't well equipped to help the client think through their own optimal emergent organizational design, well, they The consultancy says, here's the Spotify model. It's a scaling model. Some even refer to it as a methodology, which is absurd. And then we're coming in, the transformation fails, or it fails to deliver the benefits in terms of organizational performance that the CIO wanted. And then we're in there trying to make sense of why these squads, tribes, chapters, etc., were so central when they didn't do the foundational things to set up the software delivery organization for success. And what do I mean by that? Look, whether you've got hardline software reporting on, functional silos or projects, yes, we need to get rid of projects, or, or whether the teams all report, whether everybody in the tribe reports to the same manager. At the end of the day, if you haven't stabilized high performance delivery teams that stay together, that invest in technical quality, and become really predictable high performance teams at the foundation of the delivery organization, none of this fancy language with the cute names about tribes and squads and guilds is going to make any difference at all. And so this illusion that just shifting around, some organizational design parameters that fundamentally don't really change anything, and giving them cute names from Spotify is going to produce results. That's the problem that I find frustrating. So whatever you call them, let's get high performance software delivery teams tuned up and trained and using good XP development practices and paying down technical debt and decoupling their architectures. And then our scaling problems become vastly simplified. And we can talk about, simpler scaling models using Scrum of Scrums and less and other patterns like that. But, instead of managing dependencies and problems that come from coupling, let's break dependencies first. And there's a technical and organizational human element to doing that. And I would much rather be focused on achieving that than copying the Spotify model. So that's the foundation of where I got motivated to write this article. Should we tackle some of the?
Yeah. So if this is as short as it gets, that's great. I mean, we have a plenty of ammo to fire at you. I have top 5, and I bet there's some people pinging me already offline. They wanting to ask questions. So we can do it that way, Evan, if you would like.
Yeah. Why don't we tackle our top 5 and then we'll start chewing through the backlog.
Let me just actually, mix and match so that it's more objective. Does anyone on the call immediately have a question for Evan? And actually I have one coming in just now. Well, I'm just going to read it verbatim. My data science development environment uses Microsoft Azure, Databricks, Python notebooks which is a proprietary binary format. What are the recommended DevOps CI/CD methods and tools in an agile environment? Okay, so see if you want to tackle this one and to what extent.
I have no idea.
Okay.
I'm really passionate about CI/CD, and I've set up a million DevOps pipelines. But is there anything particularly different about Python notebooks in a binary format? I don't know what the implications of that specific technology would be on a CI/CD pipeline design. I'm sorry.
Okay, understood. So that's fair enough. We will take it for whatever it is. Also, some questions could be very specific. Let me mix and match. Let me take one from the top 5. The first one was, Evan's article talks about many large companies blindly adopting the Spotify model because this is the strong recommendation that comes from large consultancies. Are there any examples of at least when such recommendations were followed and implemented successfully? It seems that ING success is overly inflated. Back to you.
Yeah, there are a lot of organizations that are advertising their success with agile and digital transformations, and broadcasting specific aspects of it. I don't know a lot about ING personally. I haven't been in there as a consultant, so I'm not going to reflect on how successful they are. I do know that there's a good article that was published about how they adapted aspects of the Spotify model to suit their environment. And I celebrate that. I mean, that's exactly what we want organizations to do is use your brain. There are good patterns. There are real problems that the Spotify model was intended to solve and address. Just as Scaled Agile framework is a collection of patterns, Less is a collection of patterns, Nexus is a collection of patterns. The thing we want you to do is use your brain, understand all of the patterns, the problems that the patterns were intended to solve, and then have the ability to select and discriminate about which patterns from which frameworks you pick, because no one framework is going to have all the right answers. It's in aggregate, they're a collection or a library of patterns. Understand them all. And when you encounter a problem or an optimization challenge, say to yourself, well, I mean, here are 2 or 3 ways that different framers have solved this. Why don't we test out this model, this pattern here in the organization? Let's test out this pattern here in the organization and see what works best. And so, understand and embrace all of these, but don't ever implement all the patterns from one framework because some guy licensing classes made the decision to aggregate these particular patterns in his or her framework.
Yeah, that's a good answer, I think. In fact, so yeah, not to dwell too much on the ING pattern. There was another article as well, discussing how some of the shortcomings of Spotify implementation at ING has been fixed
Mhm.
by last implementation. But I'm going to be anchoring people to that, so I don't want to do that. But it's public, it's available. People should read it and they make their own determination, and also validate quality of writing. There's one question that I'm going to pick from the queue. Hey there. So where do you start when joining an environment where someone thought that the Spotify model is a good idea? Well, I guess you need to decouple this, who is someone, and well, anyway,
Yeah, I mean,
take it at face value.
I would take that approach of presenting them with some of the patterns that are reflected in the Spotify model. The first question is always, what are we optimizing for, right? So what is good going to look like from an outcome-based perspective? And what are the challenges that are holding us back or the impediments? And then you can ask questions about whether the patterns that are reflected in Spotify or any other framework are really producing the optimization that we seek. But I mean, there are, apart from just the language, look, a, a squad is a team. A tribe is a collection of teams that we are more generically would call a delivery group, or you can give them any number of names. A chapter could just be the same old functional reporting relationship that these siloed IT shops had all along. Is it optimal, for example, to have all of the developers in a chapter who report to a manager, or do you want the squads from a tribe to report to several, assuming span of control, reasonable span of control for a line manager for development teams? Personally, I think when the organization is performing well and the teams are cross-functional and able to deliver value and are fairly self-managing and really understand the vision that they're trying to deliver product towards and what the customer needs, I think it's much better to have everybody on the team reporting to the same manager, because then they've got the same measures and metrics and objectives and OKRs and rewards, and they're incented to align first to the team rather than to their functional specialty, as the chapter alignment would indicate. This is where in my article I was pointing to the fact that this horizontal versus vertical matrix reporting debate has been around. I've been involved in it since the 80s. It's probably been around forever. Traditional, functional alignment, we create local optimizations for our functional silo that actually sub-optimize value delivery when we work as a lean cell or a software delivery team. So I would much rather be orienting the teams Is cross-functional, that all report to one manager, several teams report to a line manager, and they're rewarded for the value they're delivering. And then we can come up with a compensatory, so at that point, what are we sub-optimizing for? The functional silo optimized for career pathing and skill development and potentially some quality or consistency aspects of the functional role that the people in the chapter all shared. But we're not designing software development product organizations to create the best tester or to create the best scrum master or create the best developer. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to deliver the most value for the customer. So why would we optimize on a functional orientation? But those things like career pathing and skill development are important. So let's create a community of practice, whether we call it a chapter or something else, but let's not make it the hard line reporting dimension of the matrix.
So I'm just going to say, I mean, you kind of took air out of my lungs on the second question I had in line, because you kind of indirectly answered it, because you talked about not relabeling chapters, existing organizational structures into chapters by just flipping them on their back and retaining hardline reporting. In fact, that was the second question, because in the article you did mention that hardline reporting within the chapter and the tribe may retain the original organizational dysfunction that was present. Of course, it means that the historical orthodox challenge of organizational design would persist, right? And new so-called agile structures will be agile in name only. So that question is answered. So if I may, I'm just going to move on to the third one. In the article, again, people are referring back to your writing, there was mention of random consultancies PowerPoint solutions in which a heavy deck is the most important asset delivered. It is often delivered by a consultant who has very little industry experience, yet presents from the deck as if it was the best known practice. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happens. I think you get a lot of folks that are overselling Spotify as a solution that's going to produce way more benefit than it's capable of doing by itself. Like, the hard work, as I said earlier, is creating really high performance teams that achieve technical excellence and very low levels of technical debt and very high levels of test automation and good CD pipelines and and DevOps chains. What you call the organizational structures of it matters very little. Let's disambiguate those cute names from the fundamental organizational design questions that we're addressing. It is important organizational design, and Spotify came up with this to deal with things like Conway's Law, which, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, Conway's Law, and I'm very much paraphrasing, but it basically says that the dysfunctions of our organizational structures and working relationships will be reflected in similar dysfunctions in our architectures and products. And being thoughtful about our design will reflect in the product outcomes that we produce. But let's use technical excellence to break dependencies and decouple the work from one another so that these teams can work more autonomously and have fewer dependencies. And then a lot of these problems are fundamentally addressed in a way that's more important and impactful than Spotify structure.
Thank you. I'm going to take another one from the queue. The question was, could you talk about how important organizational culture is and how to recognize it to help shape the transformation? So not necessarily Spotify, specific, but probably, I think it's, let handle it.
It's a great question, because Spotify really is an agile organization. They have an agile mindset and an agile culture. And it's reflected in the fact that everybody actually associated with Spotify is out there saying, if you just blindly emulate the Spotify model, you're crazy, because we deprecated the Spotify model. I mean, it was just a snapshot in an evolutionary journey at Spotify, because Spotify is agile, and we've continued to experiment and adapt and evolve beyond that snapshot in time. And so, if you're just taking that and stomping it on your organization, it just reflects that you're lacking in an agile mindset and an agile culture in the first place. And man, yeah, if culture is a really, really tough aspect of transformation change management. I think culture, I think of culture as a mirror or a measure of the progress that we're making in becoming agile, more than something that's a lever per se. Like, you can't just take the culture and alter it, because it's a reflection of the aggregated values and what we believe in and what we reward and what we value as an organization. And the levers to changing those things are fundamental changes in leadership behavior, fundamental changes in what we show we reward and what we celebrate, and the behaviors that we reinforce amongst the people of the organization over time. And when we move those levers, then we see a change or a shift in culture over time.
And there's a probably, and this is a great answer. I think really hits home on my end. I think culture is secondary to organizational structure, and expecting that all of a sudden overnight people will change their cultural beliefs or behaviors or values while residing within the same organizational domain. It's somewhere between unrealistic and delusional, right? So you would be dictated by the organizational setup how to behave and how to act. So that's a good one. There was one question in the queue which I will probably just to spare your vocals. The question was, I'll take it on. Is there a Spotify guide like we have in the Scrum guide? So there's only one PDF available. I think it was written, forget the year, but it was at least almost a decade ago by Henry Knyberg and his colleague. That's the only PDF online. So yes, there was a writer. It's not a guide. It's that's how we did it, right?
Yeah,
That's how we did it.
There's that, and then a whole bunch of write-ups that say, don't copy that.
Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Here is a red button to the rocket, but don't press it. And everyone, their mother did not read that second one, right? So
yeah, but learn
flying.
Yeah, but learn, by all means, read it, understand it, learn from it, and then experiment with some of the things that it's designed to solve. But use your brain. You're probably not a little Swedish music player development shop, so don't emulate one.
Don't unpack and install, right?
Yeah.
So there was one from the previous submission. I'm going to read off. Our company was advised to adopt Spotify model. Today, some of old vertical organizational structures, such as QA department, architecture group, have become chapters, and people are mandated to be a part of those chapters. Used to be managers are now chapter leads. Nothing seems to be changing. What are your thoughts on this?
That's the problem. I mean, you can just rename a bunch of existing crap behaviors and fundamentally have changed nothing in terms of the performance capability of your organization. You can implement Spotify and not have changed a thing. And that is the danger.
Yep. Good answer. Quick question from the queue. Any idea on how Spotify is now performing? So in other words, any intel on how the company does it?
I know that they have evolved way past this design. I mean, Spotify is a great product and a great company, and they truly are a high performance agile organization that continues to adapt and evolve. And that's the foundation of real business agility. We need, as organizations, to view agility not just as something that occurs in a walled garden where the software is written, but where the entire organization and all of its functions are lean and agile and adaptable and experimenting and evolving for greater competitive fitness in the markets and environments that our businesses compete. And Spotify, I think, reflects all of that in a very positive example. I like their product. I like who they are, and and I think there's a lot to learn from them. Most especially that there is no static stopping point in the evolution of your org design.
Good answer. By the way, we're gonna have to time box ourselves. I see that the queue is exploding, so I'm gonna have to fast forward. One thing about Spotify current situation, the Spotify current situation, and this isn't just my biased view. I'm not sure if this reflects how things are actually being done internally, but procurement methods that they are using to bring in agile expertise, agile experts, might have changed since the early days, because I personally got at least a half a dozen of second level, third level, second, third hand agencies reaching out with very ill-defined requisitions, looking for agile project something, so in name only. So I'm gonna leave it at that. Hopefully this is just a one-off. It's not a common trend.
Maybe maybe we should use the title or the Q-Buzz model.
Yeah. I am going to take another one from the queue. As I understand, Spotify model asks for change in the org structure because of process as well as re-engineering of product architecture. Is my understanding correct, or needs some modification?
I don't know that I believe that the Spotify model has a specific prescription for a change in architecture. Now, the flow of work is, recognizing that you have aggregations of teams that have to collaborate. All of the scaling frameworks have elements of dependency management and coordination that are associated with some of the behaviors that you'd see in a tribe. There are a lot of different ways to deal with these things, and I don't even think descriptive about how those coordinating activities occur. I'll bring you back to the very early days of Scrum, when we had a very simple scaling mechanism that started with Scrum of Scrums. There was a higher concept called the meta Scrum. It is, again, vastly preferable to break dependencies and have resilient architectures that allow more autonomy for teams to work without breaking each other. And then the coordination overhead implied, in elaborate PI planning that pulls in many, many teams with lots of hard dependencies. That is compensating for dysfunction, right? Anybody should be evolving past that when the architectural quality and technical debt of their product are getting in line. You don't need to have that level of dependency management, right? So yeah, architecture is important. Technical excellence is important. The tribe may be a container to manage interdependencies between teams, but figure out the right methodology and process and planning with the appropriate overhead for the technical and human dependency chains that your actual product
Sure.
has to deal with.
Thank you. We're on the half of the hour, so we're actually in the Q&A mode, so we're pretty good. I'm going to take another one from the queue. I have one more from the previous submission. I'm going to save it for later because there's only one. There was one comes from some of the gentlemen. A straight copy paste is probably never a good idea for any agile method, although the listed last safe Scrum and Scale design methods, these are frameworks. So isn't it valid to use the Spotify model as a starting point for an experimental approach and adjust as needed for the individual organization? So I'm not going to try to even decipher it. I think you understand it's at its face value.
Sorry, I was reading things and stuff again. Can you summarize?
Just paraphrasing, isn't it valid to start off with a Spotify model as a starting point and experiment and adjust as needed for the individual organization? So
yeah, I don't necessarily disagree. I mean, the fact that you have in the original publication chapter leads that are essentially the equivalent to the functional managers, means that you're really not changing things from what most IT organizational structures are. You're mostly just changing symbolic labels. Um, so, does that make it easier to adopt some incremental change? Maybe. Is it actually accomplishing anything? I'm not sure. I think the thing that's important is that you have an agile mindset, which means that you're committed to continuous improvement, that you're always looking for opportunities to evolve and improve. And as your challenges change, the nature of your bottlenecks evolve in a theory of constraints sort of way, that your organization isn't static. So sure, if it's an incremental step, great. Just don't change everybody's labels and then call yourself done. That's what I don't want to see.
Eh, just since you gave your version, I'm just going to add a little something. It isn't so much a problem with starting somewhere and experimenting and inspecting and adapting as we expect people to do. What is problematic, at least in my experiences, is that usually people, when they set their bar extremely low, they tend to remain at that level and never improve because they have a sense of comfort at that level. So they don't really push themselves hard enough. And the second, I think, is also, of course, you should inspect and adapt and experiment, but also look for those existing experiments out there. And some of the frameworks have decades of it documented and thoroughly documented. So, instead of having your own black and blues, read about black and blues successes and failures of others. So it's just a fair way to start your own journey, understand what others have done. But of course, you want to inspect and adapt in your own. Moving on to the next one, can you define what you mean by agile mindset? So give you 30 seconds on that.
I think I kind of just did.
Yeah, I think you did, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really embracing, continuous improvement and, being data driven and theory driven decision making and validated learning. And just this desire to continuously get better, sense and adapt, and deliver more value for the customer, better outcomes for the customer.
Yep, good. Taking another one from the queue, would you happen to have and share an example of a company that started with the Spotify model, realized they were on the wrong path and adapted their models and methods? If you don't have an example, I can give one, but let you publicly.
Why don't you go ahead, Gene, and
Yeah. So
I'll
as I mentioned, there's a public case study out there how the Spotify model at one of the Netherlands banks has been improved with something . So I don't want to anchor anyone, but I'll share that article with people as needed. So
yeah,
there was obviously.
read that article. So I really was motivated to write the article because I really have been involved in any number of agile transformations, digital transformations, DevOps transformations, in which we're kind of cleaning up after vastly inflated expectations from the Spotify model were led to disappointment. Where essentially, there was a lot of fanfare and a lot of political capital invested in change management around installing Spotify, and it was oversold to the point that somehow this alone was going to produce tremendous improvements in the performance of the organization. And these transformations are essentially failing. You've got people who spent months or even years stirring up the organization and the people in it, and changing labels and reporting relationships and things like that can be disruptive, and people get concerned about that. And when the focus is on those more superficial aspects of the organization and you're not really working on creating the foundation of really high performance teams and technical excellence, you're not going to see any benefit. And so we're encountering a lot of these organizations that are saying, look, man, we didn't get out of this what we thought we would. And oh crap, you mean the hard work is yet to come? We haven't even started on the hard part. And that's where we come in. And obviously, because these are clients, I can't mention the names, but
Yeah,
they're
we don't
typically,
mention names. We don't mention names.
yeah, but these are, I mean, these are large organizations, and some of them are, corporate IT organizations of many thousands of people who've done this pretty broadly. And you can imagine the chaos. And, if you don't get the results, it's a political risk for everybody involved, and it's frustrating.
That's right. Sometimes it's just so hard to push away from the table and call it a bad experiment because there's
Mhm.
so much vested. It's a sunk cost, right?
Yep.
I'm going to give you one last question from the previous submission, and we're going to go back to the queue. So paraphrasing, well, actually, almost verbatim. We work. This is from the fintech space. The organization is from the financial sector. We have been struggling to implement basic Scrum. We can't, we can't. What is this? We can't optimize on delivery to a real paying customer. We are challenged with some very basic stuff, yet our management is expecting us to scale it. We have teams that are built of external people, vendors, people that are not on par with one another. So we have a real classic dysfunction at basic Scrum level, yet we're trying to scale. And these Scrum teams are being relabeled into squads. Uh, that's the challenge we're dealing with. So, if you want to reflect on that.
No, thank you for sharing that situation. I think those of us who've been, agile enterprise agile coaches and worked in transformation have seen this time and time again. And I recognize how challenging this is for you, and good for you to recognize that, that these foundational aspects, scaling on a foundation of marshmallows is a really bad idea. Um, and so I often talk about, there's a healthy debate among coaches about whether Scrum is really helpful or whether continuous flow is better. Does the iteration and the pressure of a sprint commitment, help a team or hurt a team? And I think there are very valid points made on both sides of this argument. But I think the positive thing about using Scrum is that if a team cannot deliver something of value every 2 weeks in a measurable way, there's a lot of learning about what's holding us back. And I like the iteration because of the feedback and the discipline that it requires to show something measurable and prove that we can actually ship working software on that 2-week cadence. Having achieved that, I believe that the overhead of the iteration and some of this loses its utility. These very high performance XP teams that have continuous delivery pipelines that are releasing to production every check-in or every few check-ins multiple times per day, they don't have any need for this, right? So by all means, transcend Scrum when your demonstrated maturity as a team it no longer gets utility from it. And I think there's a scaling metaphor with scaled agile or various scaling frameworks that's the same. You may find that one of these scaling frameworks solves a problem that you have today, but this is not an end state. This is not ultimate maturity by fully implementing multi-level whatever. This should also be transcended when you've solved your dependency management problems and your technical architecture problems, et cetera. You shouldn't need all of this overhead and bloat and stuff anymore, and you should transcend it as well. So, to your question, I'm sorry that your leadership in this fintech IT organization isn't doubling down on doing the hard work of creating these high performance teams that are the essential foundation to become, a successful scale delivery organization at scale. if you're not predictable and transparent, as a team, 100 teams are only going to make the problem worse.
Thank you for that. There was one question that actually, so I don't want to skip one over. So I'm going to get to that one in a second. This question is the question to you is, I'm going to read off as I see it. With his focus on having everyone in X functional teams reported the same manager, I'm worried that Evan is optimizing for delivery, e.g. Velocity and defect elimination, and not getting the right product to market. If you want product excellence rather than disruption, susceptible mediocrity, then communities of practice for UX, design, product management, etc., often do not cut it. Isn't professional alignment often needed if you want to be the best in a highly competitive market? And there is an addendum to this. In the above question, the key to using OKRs is to define them for the product team, not the functional team to which a person reports, to make sure people are focused on business use outcomes. So it's a pretty long question.
Yeah.
You followed my
No,
narrative.
thank you, Peter. I mean, I think it's a thoughtful question. My reaction is that defining the right product is a function of product management. Product management has content authority for what features are developed, and it should be based on really deep empathy and understanding of the customer or the user, based on validated learning of customer hypothesis, problem hypothesis, and a set of continuously evolving experiments around the solution hypothesis that solves that customer problem. And I don't think that having all the developers report to the same manager really addresses that either way, right? Now, your premise that having excellence in a functional specialty is important, I completely agree with. The implication of your question is that a community of practice cannot provide a strong center of excellence around the practices and skills of the functional specialties. In reality, many of the communities of practice, as they're implemented by organizations, are weak. They don't have strong organizational support that really gives them some authority or makes them compelling and budgets time and money for the people in these COPs to really get a lot of value out of it, right? So if your point is that we underinvest in the COPs, in reality, yes, we often do. But that doesn't mean that that the functional specialty is more important to optimize for than the performance of a cohesive, high-performance team that has a set of shared goals that they're all aligned on, that align to the strategy of the company and the customer outcomes that we're trying to get. And your point about OKRs, I'm a big fan of OKRs. I believe in having good alignment between the three-year corporate strategy and the more measurable objectives on a quarterly basis that we're all producing to achieve that strategy. OKRs are a great tool, but that doesn't mean that we should still keep functional silos. Although it may be an evolutionary process to get. You got to have pretty strong teams that are very cohesive to make this shift.
I just want to add something to this, Evan, if you don't mind. So speaking of communities of practice specifically, and so just pick up the third large-scale Scrum book. It's the book. It's not the deck. And read. There was a huge section. There's a huge part of it talks about communities of practice and how they could work for your organization and support functional learning and cross-pollination with knowledge and expertise that spreads laterally without retaining organizational orthodox organizational design that comes with line reporting and functional silos. So just read the book.
Yeah, and building. Thank you, Gene. That's a great. It is a great book, and there's a lot of learning in there. I would also add that implicit in this conversation that we're having with Peter also is what is the role definition of the manager, of the reporting manager in a software development organization. And I think that might be an important element of the conversation to touch on, because what we often see is the dev manager has this impossible mashup job description. In a lot of organizations, there isn't a good technology only career growth path, right? So you know, a lot of organizations, even though they should, they don't have a good non-managerial way for technologists to continue to have growth in their career, higher levels of income, more responsibility and challenge. So people end up having to become dev managers to get promoted and make more money and have more prestige, right? Even though they don't really want to be, right? So then you've got this dev manager job description that's usually completely screwed up, right? They're simultaneously three things. They're an HR manager for hiring and developing and caring for humans, and but they're
Yeah.
and then they're also some kind of project manager, because there's some element of their job description that says that they're supposed to keep things on time and on budget, and you know, this other stuff. And then there's probably a technical element that says they're supposed to be contributing to good design and architecture. And it's totally impossible for one person to be really successful at all three of those things in a single job role. So let's think of the reporting manager. What's the most important thing, especially when we've got teams, cross-functional teams reporting to a dev manager? Let's have that manager be that personnel manager, the one that's really caring for humans and optimizing for the care and feeding of the team and the humans on it. And then let's move responsibility for the team self-managing, so we don't really need the on-time on project manager stuff to be in that manager role anymore. We can just, you know, high performing teams are automatically on time, on budget. And we have transparency through the scrum master and the coaches to help them improve if they're having impediments. And then let's take design excellence and put that into a dev lead role or something else where you know, design is divorced from the managerial role. And maybe much of that design role can be moved into the communities of practice, where representation from the skill sets comes together as part of the quality dimension, quality management and governance dimension of how this organization is working. So again, we're talking about completely different organizational design paradigms that also include changes in the roles and the span of control that these roles can have as the roles are simplified, clarified, in their accountability.
It's kind of hard to learn in a safe way from another functional expert if this very expert is also someone who is going to tell you how much you're worth in the middle of the year or at the end of the year, right? So someone who does performance appraisal may not be necessarily the ideal lead for the community, right?
Maybe.
There was one question that someone sent to me via LinkedIn about OKRs. So for those that are not familiar with an OKR, well, what it means, it stands for objectives and key results. So paraphrasing the comment, in our organization, there is a humongous stress being made on OKRs at various organizational levels, tribes, squads, chapters of chapters. But if we look at basic Scrum, OKR is what you really keep in the backlog, and the product owner is someone who would know most intimately what an OKR should be, what objectives are, and what key results are. Any comments on that from Evan?
So the OKRs for a product manager are going to be related to outcomes that, you know, are actually tracing the business impacts, leading indicators for business drivers for that product. If it's an internal product, then something related to user satisfaction or engagement and efficiency. for what that product is doing for the user. The OKRs for the teams should have an element, and you can do some balanced scorecarding with these things too, right? So, there's important things that the team members are measured on. Ideally, teams are increasingly responsible for evaluating team members themselves, right? I mean, I learned long ago when I was running, big dev shops, I used to think I was pretty smart about saying who the best, developer or tester was when I was doing performance evals. And I was shocked when I started actually asking the teams themselves who they thought were most valuable or the best team members or the greatest contributors, or who is the team member that you would really want to have on your next team most. And I started incorporating that feedback. I realized I didn't know I wasn't that good as I thought I was. I was finding out that I was really undervaluing members of the team who had the emotional intelligence and maturity to help the team be cohesive. And I was over rewarding people who were kind of alpha nerds, who were, exhibited technical excellence, but may not be actually helping the team be that much better and happier. So things like that are important. And OKRs, one of the important things about OKRs is they don't cascade. You can't take an OKR from a VP and copy and paste it to the director and the manager and the scrum master, or whatever. An OKR is an opportunity for a conversation for us to figure out how our role aligns to the organization's objectives and what we really have within our sphere of control to do that we can do to help the organization and its strategy. And so anyway, those are some thoughts on OKRs.
Thank you. And there's some passive comments in the queue as well. Probably read them. You can read them as well about OKRs, shared versus, I guess, individuals, and some others. So these are not really questions. These are statements. Okay. We have 8 minutes before we have to wrap. There was one question that came through LinkedIn again, with regards to who is behind all of this and who should be doing this. But before we do this, before we take this question, perhaps someone wants to actually ask a question by voicing, because I don't see any more questions in the queue, and I'm out of pre-selected questions. What metrics have you used in your conversation with the executive teams where a Spotify model was seen the way to go? Okay, well, that's the question. Any questions about this? Metrics questions, go.
Good evening.
No, I'm sorry. There was a question for Evan. What metrics? Okay. What metrics have you used in your conversation with the executive teams where Spotify model was seen the way to go? Evan, that's the question for you.
Well, I don't know how to answer that specific to Spotify, but the metrics, metrics is a huge conversation. Maybe that's the next 1 hour conversation we'll have.
Okay.
But I'm a great believer in lean metrics. I really try to remind people that agile is the software instantiation of lean product development. And so, and I see Mick Kirsten, with his flow framework, repopularizing, metrics that came out of Toyota Production System in the 80s. And they're like agilists who somehow, missed the memo that things like throughput and cycle time and flow efficiency and this stuff. And I think Mick's great. I'm really glad that he's repopularizing these things. He's not claiming he invented them, but there are people who don't know that these are things that Toyota was optimizing value streams around in the 80s. And they're, it's great that people are using the right metrics again. And if Mick is helping people understand how to optimize value streams, so much the better.
All right, cool. We got 5 more minutes, 2 more short questions. How do you avoid cascading OKRs? And what have you seen as a core? Well, two separate ones. The second
Yeah,
one,
and I want to do a shout out to Srikanth, who said, do not tie OKRs to your performance rewards system. So thank you, Srikanth, for that
yeah,
shout out.
I'm
That
sorry,
is,
I overlooked you. Hey guys, please mute yourself if you don't ask questions. Please mute. Need to use the magic.
you're going to use the nuke bomb on them?
1 second. Unmute yourself in a second.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah,
you.
so cascading and tying them to performance rewards are the two big no-nos of OKRs. And how to not cascade them, it's fairly simple. Instead of just taking something that's directly derivative of the person above you in the org chart and kind of just blindly pulling the OKR down without really thinking about it, it's an invitation to a conversation where you use your brain. You ask the person, who's actually doing the job, given the vision, given the strategy, given the big picture, the 3-year objectives, the 1-year corporate objectives, the departmental and functional objectives, the OKRs around you, how can you, what are the OKRs that are appropriate for you to maximize your impact for the organization, the customer, the business, what have you. So it's that conversation, and it's using your brain and finding that alignment that makes sense in the ecosystem that you work in.
Okay, good one. Next one was so there was a question about communities of practice again, and although I would strongly recommend reading the book that I posted for others about communities of practice, it actually spells out as following: what have you seen as the core success reasons for COPs?
Yeah, so I mean, we underinvest in COPs again and again, right? So the COP, it doesn't have to be the reporting dimension, but it needs investment. It needs leadership. It needs room to grow and breathe in terms of people having enough slack in their schedule from their delivery obligations, and to be able to actually have time to spend with their COP doing some kind of structure. It should have a budget for events. It should have a learning budget that supports professional development. It should have a lot of latitude to creatively, augment the skill sets and career pathing of the people in it. And that's just the simplest starting point. Invest in it, give it time and space and money and leadership and bandwidth so that it can thrive. And a vehicle for communication, whether that's wikis and all of that stuff. You feed it so it thrives and grows. Don't starve it.
Yep. Evan, we have time for one more question before we wrap. We got 2 minutes, T-2. So there was one question that was actually the composite of the two. What's the main benefit of Spotify, let's say, in comparison to less? Although you shouldn't feel anchored to answer this in a certain way because it's a part of the less event, not at all. In fact, I don't expect you to compare and contrast because you have only 1 minute. The other part of the question was, what is the case and when we should use Spotify model? I mean, I'm not sure.
So, I mean, if the question is, should we copy and paste it literally from the article? The answer is don't. I mean, there may be elements in there that are useful, but I mean, apart from the cute names, just understand what they're doing with the design, and then think about what parts of it make sense for you.
Yeah, and so just to add to this, since there were no documents, there are no experiments documented over years. There are no case studies. There was no content to leverage to maybe to learn from. Then you have to proceed with extra caution, right? One single PDF cannot be your your guidance to how to install it, right?
And God forbid, you take some big 5 consultancy PowerPoint deck that is an interpretation of a PDF of a dissimilar organization, and you go implement that, because then there's somebody who's getting paid to sell it to you as a copy paste solution that, that's totally mercenary. So don't fall for that one.
Yep, I think that's on this note. It's a good note to wrap up on, right? So do not copy paste because it's in a thick PowerPoint deck. So with this, I'm going to have to wrap it, and I would like to thank everyone for joining today. Unexpectedly, genuinely speaking, this turned out to be a very very live conversation with lots of questions coming through the queue, and no deck being used for to drive this conversation at the beginning. So to me, it's an exciting opportunity it's an exciting learning opportunity. Evan,
Thank you, Gene. Thank you, everybody. Great questions, and it was a fun dialogue. I really enjoyed it.
And thank you very much for doing this, Evan. We'll zap it and record it as soon as we're done. I'm sorry, zap the recording and make it available for everyone sometime in the nearby future, okay? Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.